Hey everyone, we are back for our second virtual panel of the day. A reminder that if you are joining us on Zoom, that the chat is open, so feel free to throw in any questions or thoughts that you have, and we will do our best to weave that into the conversation today. This next panel is 67 Cleveland Summit, Past, Present, and Future, and we'll be discussing why this gathering in 1967 was so crucial and how this has affected the 21st century version of athlete activism in sports and in society. We'll be getting our panelists on here shortly. I see you, Eli. You can go ahead and turn on your video. Hi, Mary. Hi, how are you?
I am well, thank you. Good afternoon.
Good, good. I know we're getting everyone on here, so I'll turn it over to the two of you to get our panel started.
Thank you.
Great, and so we're just gonna have our panelists join. Hi, Gwen.
How you guys doing?
Hey, Gwen, doing all right.
Damion, and I guess we're gonna wait for Erin.
And there's Damion.
Well, hey, Damion. Then we got Erin.
Hi,
as
Damion.
well. Excellent.
Nice to see you, Damion.
You too.
Very good to see you all. Yeah, thank you all so much for being a part of this today. We're really just so honored to be a part of the Power of Sports Summit overall, Cleveland Power of Sports Summit, and to have this really important conversation. We're so honored to be joined today by Damien Thomas with the Smithsonian, the sport curator. We also have Erin, the director of programs with the Muhammad Ali Center. So wonderful to have you. And then of course, Gwen, the amazing Gwen. So amazing and so awesome to have you with us as well. I know you're busy with training and getting ready for everything coming up with the Olympics, but everything that you have done in your leadership with athlete activism. So really just looking forward to this conversation, framing it out, really important to this whole event to kind of have this history, to think about past, present, and future. And it's just so great to be able to co-host this with my colleague, Mary Hums at the University of Louisville. So I'm going to turn it over to Mary to share some remarks, and we'll also hear from Erin as well. And then we're going to jump right into kind of a rapid interactive discussion. So over to you, Mary.
All right. Well, thank you, Eli. And again, so great to be here. Thank you so much to the Cleveland Sport Commission and everyone else who was involved in making this happen today. It's great. And there was events yesterday and today. And so it's really wonderful to see the city of Cleveland celebrating its heritage and celebrating these events and hosting all of us here virtually as we talk about the Cleveland Summit today. So yeah, as Eli said, once we get rolling, it's going to be a little rapid fire, go around the Zoom room and have everybody here in the panel address some of our questions. And of course, we would be open to any comments in the chat as well, and that would be great. So before we get the questions started, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague from Louisville and the home of Muhammad Ali, Erin Herbert from the Ali Center. Erin?
Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Eli, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be in space with all of you today. As they mentioned, I have the sincere privilege and responsibility to be the Director of Programming and Education for the Muhammad Ali Center. The Ali Center has been in existence since November of 2005, and we are broadly tasked with translating and continuing the living legacy of Muhammad Ali through programming, through community engagement, and through the work of the center. The mission of the Muhammad Ali Center is to preserve and share the legacy and ideals of Muhammad Ali, to promote respect, hope, and understanding, and to inspire adults and children everywhere to be as great as they can be. My task at the center is to help bring that mission to life through programming, through engagement. We do that in so many different ways, but one of the core focus areas of our work at the center is athlete activism and athletes and social change. One of our premier programs and a wonderful partnership that we've had for so many years now with Eli and Mary is our Athletes and Social Change Forum, which takes place each summer, and really examines the unique role that athletes have, the unique platform that athletes have in leadership, in social change and advocacy and activism efforts. Gwen was a wonderful part of our forum last summer, and it was an entirely virtual forum. And I understand that you all have access to that through this wonderful program today. And you are also welcome to access all of that wonderful conversation and dialogue and engagement through our website as well. It's there for you. It's a living resource. And we will be back together again this summer in June. And so I want to just start by inviting you all to continue the conversation and participating with us in that conversation as well in June. And I'll be happy to talk a little bit more about the center and some of our other work as we go through the engagement. But again, the center is just very honored to be a part of this conversation today, and I thank you all for being with us.
Excellent. Thank you, Erin, just for sharing. And given, as we'll talk about, this past, present, future of the Cleveland Summit, but also sometimes known as the Ali Summit. So kind of the anchoring around the history of Muhammad Ali and the collective that joined together. And so we're really going to start to share those stories and start to understand the context and how we are engaging in that way and learning. And so we're going to start off with our first question, which really looks at, what do you know about the Cleveland Summit, the 67th Summit, and when did you first learn about it, and kind of those stories that emerge. And we're excited to start off with Damion, just from his historical perspective and everything at the museum and the Smithsonian. So we're going to start with you, Damion, if you'd share that story, and then we'll go back to Erin, and then we'll go to Gwen.
Sure. I think I became first aware of this story in the 1990s, and there was a book written about Muhammad Ali. It's called Muhammad Ali, A Life. And it was just a series of interviews with a number of people who had worked with him and knew him and was involved in some of the activism. And that was my first time kind of hearing about it. But as a UCLA Bruin, I got my bachelor's, master's, and PhD from UCLA. You're always sort of learning about the legacy of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who was the only amateur athlete there at that time. And so this idea of in many ways, the four leading athletes of that day coming together to make a statement and to stand together was a really important moment. And so it's been something that's sort of influenced how I've thought about sports since that day a long time ago.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that. And then we'll go over to Erin now. I know, Erin, you and I had talked over the years about the Cleveland Summit and kind of that history. And so maybe if you could share a little bit as well.
Absolutely. And I really came to understand the Cleveland Summit, the Ali Summit, through my work at the Ali Center. I'm ashamed to say, because Jim Brown was always one of my father's great heroes, that I was not familiar with the summit until I became the education manager at the center, and of course began to study Muhammad's history and Muhammad's role in social justice, and of course as an athlete activist. And I think to Damien's point, it presents a really interesting conversation as we look at the current role of athletes in social change, as we look at the critical nature of collective power building, the importance of showing up for each other, for using our collective roles to enhance the voice of athletes, particularly those that are taking great risk, the way that Muhammad did in speaking up for justice and for equality and for freedom and for liberation. I think it cannot be understated, it can be overstated, the sincere courage it took for Muhammad to stand on his conviction, what he risked in his conscientious objection. Simply, he was at the height of his physical prowess, the height of his career, and his license to box was stripped away. He was unable to earn his income in his chosen profession because of his sincerely held beliefs, his sincerely held religious conviction, his sincerely held anti-racist conviction, his unwillingness to participate in the colonialization of people, his unwillingness to participate in the killing of Black and brown bodies around the world, his willingness to stand on his beliefs. Muhammad was willing to risk everything. And the power of his fellow athlete activists to come around him, to stand collectively, shoulder to shoulder, in front of the world's press, to say, we support, we are here, we stand together. We're not here to convince Ali to go back, to retract his objection, but rather we stand in sincere belief and sincere conviction. I think it's also important to note that so many of the athletes that were at the summit didn't come necessarily with shared belief. They didn't necessarily agree with Muhammad, but they were still willing to support his sincere conviction, his stance, his leadership. I believe that it lends such a wonderful model for all of us as we move forward in this work, as we continue to work for freedom and for liberation and for justice. The importance of collective action cannot be, as I said, overstated. And so I'll leave it at that and turn it over to Gwen to come into the conversation.
No, over to you, Gwen. Yeah, no, thank you, Erin.
Well, unfortunately, just because of how I was raised, the type of education I did have and didn't have growing up, I didn't know about the Cleveland Summit until probably just recently, until I myself took a stand against social injustice. Me and my coach, we talked about it. I read stories about it, watched videos about it. But I think the most powerful thing about it is, I think it's something that no one knew that could ever be done. Like, it was something that literally rocked the world and shaped the world, because here are the top iconic Black athletes in the world saying, enough is enough. Like, stop killing the people that look like me, stop capitalizing off people that look like me, and stop putting our lives in danger for your monetary gains. And I feel like that is something that has never happened before. So that is why it was so powerful. And that is something that I feel like should be taught in schools, but it isn't. I never knew about it at all. And I feel like that resonated with me because Muhammad Ali is one of my favorite athletes of all times. Before I compete, I always watch his videos. I always watch boxing videos. He is somebody that I want to be like as far as my activist endeavors. And, he shaped the world. He affected change and affected lives around the world. He is the most recognized athlete of all times worldwide. And I think it was powerful, to say the least.
Thank you so much. So turn over to Mary for the next round of questions.
Okay, and thank you for sharing it, for sharing your thoughts there. So, we've had you reflect on how you learned about the past, but now wanting to have you reflect on the present and what you're doing. So the question that I'd like you to consider is, what do you do now in your current role and activities to share the legacy of the 67 Cleveland Summit? And in order, we'll start with Erin, then we'll go to Gwen, and then to Damion. So Erin, please.
Absolutely. Well, of course, broadly at the center, we are tasked with teaching about Muhammad's legacy and his history as comprehensively as possible. I think too often Muhammad's legacy is whitewashed, and the whole of his history is not taught. So we of course discuss the Cleveland Summit and all of Muhammad's history through our programming and our work. We do that in a number of different ways. A few that I will highlight: we actually create curriculum that goes into both informal and formal educational institutions. So we have a new curriculum that is focused broadly on creating the next generation of social justice leaders. And we use Muhammad's history as the framework of that curriculum. It's written specifically to fit well with core content for K through 12 schools, but can be used in community organizations or other settings. But it's really a way for young people to use Muhammad's history, use Muhammad's legacy, but to figure out how they can take up his torch and to continue his legacy through their own work in social change and in inclusive community building and injustice organizing. We also work with young people at the center, and the Cleveland Summit, I think, is a core part of how we work with these young people, in that we bring youth together who come from diverse perspectives with different ideas, with different opinions. We put them into space, and it's about authentic coalition building, where they, like the Cleveland Summit, can stand shoulder to shoulder, engage with each other, and take on different areas of focus for social justice. So we really are looking for these young people to be leaders in our community, and we see them emerge as leaders. And the most powerful part of these programs is that their fellow students are standing with them. One student might be interested in environmental justice particularly, or another student is engaging in the school to prison pipeline or educational justice, and they have their passion, but they share that passion with each other and come together in coalition, in collective power to take action. And of course, that is informed by what we saw through Muhammad's history, not only in the Cleveland Summit, but beyond, and how he stood side by side and represented causes and used his platform to bring people together and to move movements forward. So it is certainly a core part of our work at the center.
Thank you. The power of peers, right?
Absolutely.
Peers. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Gwen.
I love what Miss Erin said. I think it's so important to implement, Muhammad Ali's legacy into schools, into education, because I feel like had I had known these type of things and this type of historical facts, I feel like I would have known at an earlier age that social injustice was very important to me. And I probably would have acted on it before, the age of 30 years old. So I think that's truly important. For me, what I'm doing now, everybody knows in 2019, I took my stand at the Pan American Games. I protested against racial injustice. Currently, I have been changing policies and getting different policies implemented. The United States Olympic Committee, they have said that they will not athletes who speak out at any major championships. So peacefully protesting social injustices. So I think that was a big defeat for athletes here in America, because too often enough, we are silenced and we are put against one another. We cannot, and we are too afraid to stand with each other in solidarity to say, these are the issues that we are tired of just pushing up under the rug. These are issues that we need to address. We need to come together. We need to change laws. We need to implement new rules, a new way of people's thinking socially. And I feel like that's what I'm really, really working on now. I recently put out a PSA probably 2 days ago, just, continuing to make my voice heard and push the message that Black people, we need help. We are dying at the hands of police. We are dying at the hands of an American system that has been designed to work against us. And, I'll keep moving forward. Right now, I am training for the Tokyo 2021 Olympics, and I do plan to be a voice, to be a beacon of hope, and to be, just a leader in those regards and those issues.
And if I could do a follow-up with you, Gwen, because you started out as part of it talking about education, and do you have a chance to talk to young people directly about your stances that you're taking and educate them the way you didn't have that chance to be educated?
Absolutely. Now I do. So it's crazy because, at track meets, young athletes come up to me and we talk. I train at a middle school. So it's really amazing that these young kids, because I train at the middle school, they have looked me up, they have Googled me. So they come to my practices and we talk about these things. Of course, being on Zoom panels, Zoom calls, talking to college students, being a part of that. So I am able to, educate more than I've ever have before. Nowadays, for sure.
Okay. Thank you. Hey, Damion, Let's hear from you.
Oh, sure. One of the things that we try to do at the Smithsonian is to contextualize these key moments in a much larger context. And for those of you who've been to the sports gallery, one of the things that might stand out is that it's not really designed as a Hall of Fame, which just celebrates important athletic accomplishments, but rather I tried to conceptualize the gallery in a way that it tells African-American history through the lens of sports. And so for me, it's much more important that we use sports as an entry point to larger political, social, and cultural conversations. So if we think about the Cleveland Summit, it's really important to think about it in the context of the Vietnam War. It's one of the crucial ways to kind of understand it. What's interesting, and the civil rights movement, what's interesting about the civil rights movement is that in many ways, it starts with World War II. African Americans going to fight, using their war service to say that we should have equality at home. They developed this thing called the double V, victory at home and victory abroad. How can we go fight anti-Semitism in Germany and allow racism to continue in the United States? And so what happens out of World War II is that President Truman develops the Presidential Council for Civil Rights, which lays out the agenda for civil rights advancement in the United States for the next 25 years. Well, what happens with Vietnam is the Vietnam War and the intensification of the Vietnam War signals that things are about to change. Because one of the things that happens in 65, 66 is that President Johnson takes his best people who had been working on civil rights, and now he moves them to the Vietnam War. You also get the election, the midterm election of 1966, which shifts the Congress. So now Johnson is less focused and believes that he can't get civil rights legislation through. And so leaders are beginning to see that. One of the things we would also come to learn about the Vietnam War was that African Americans were 10% of the citizens, 32% of those who served, and 50% of those who served on the front lines. So African Americans saw that this was a war that was disproportionately impacting them. And they saw that rather than like World War II leading to an increase of opportunities, the Vietnam War is going to lead to a decrease of opportunities and a focus on the civil rights movement. We also have 2 months before the Cleveland Summit, Martin Luther King Jr. comes out and speaks out against the Vietnam War. That's an incredibly important moment because one of the things we have to remember about Martin Luther King Jr., he always worked with the Kennedys and he worked with Johnson because he knew if they were going to get civil rights reform, that they had to work with the executive branch. So this is a crucial moment when African Americans are beginning to see that there's a conflict between the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War for the attention of America. And so we try to kind of think about that larger context as we try to share this story.
And when I think about context and putting events and people into context, if I might, Erin, I think about the Ali Center. So many people often think when they hear the Muhammad Ali Center that it's going to be a boxing museum. And it is not. It is a story of a man's life. And what he did in the ring, of course, brought him, fame. But it's more about how he lived his life and the impact he had. And again, contextualizing him as well.
Certainly, and I appreciate and have not been had the opportunity to visit Damien's institution in DC, but I appreciate the description of how that experience is curated, because you have a very similar experience at the Ali Center. We were very intentional. Muhammad was very intentional in his involvement with the center as we were under creation for nearly a decade, that the center not simply be a space that celebrated his greatness, though he loved being the greatest. And so the center is not curated in a straight line. It's not Muhammad did this in 65, this in 75, this in 85. It is very contextualized as an experience of inspiration and learning, where you really meander through the geography of the space. You step inside pavilions that are framed around his core principles: confidence, conviction, dedication, giving, respect, and spirituality, principles and values that Muhammad understood would translate to people in their journeys to finding personal greatness through their activism, through their service to others. And so the center is certainly meant to be a learning and an inspirational experience, even in the physical curation of how Muhammad's story is shared. I'll stop there, but absolutely, it resonated with me.
Okay. And as I'm going to turn it over to Eli here now for the next set of questions, but just want to remind anybody, other participants that are out there, that the chat is open. And if you want to put something in, you can. Was I on mute, Eli?
Briefly, it's okay.
Oh, I thought, okay, I'm all right now. So you could hear all that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So Eli, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, excellent. Well, thank you all. This is really engaging, getting the historical perspectives and sharing of these different stories, connecting back to the Cleveland Summit and how it's impacting us and the way we're understanding where we are today. So our third round of rapid fire, if you will, is to really look at the athlete activism today and into the future, and really thinking about those ideas. What are some of the opportunities that could emerge in the future? What do we see as some goals, some visions? And not only for the athletes, but also for different stakeholders. Could be the sport managers, could be coaches, officials, could be the media, thinking about different stakeholders in the sports realm, but also in society as a whole. And so we wanted to start with Gwen, and then Damion, and then Erin. But we'll start with Gwen to share kind of visions, ideas. I know you're working on so many, but perhaps you can just give us some teasers or things you envision for the future.
Yeah, so I feel like as far as like athlete activism, there has been a renaissance. Like, let's be honest, the world is literally changing in front of our eyes. Nothing will ever be the same as it was in 2019, just because of the events that has happened before 2019 and the events that's happened after 2019. And I feel like the athletes now, because they understand the power of their voices, the power of their platforms, and honestly, the power that they hold as athletes and entertainers, I feel like now is the time where we see that these major icons are saying, let's change the rules to help and affect everybody, especially the marginalized and the minorities. There are laws that may be changed because athletes are literally breaking down and storming the Capitol saying, let's change these laws. Let's get some laws in place. Let's change these rules. Let's see how we can give back to the communities in a major way. I feel like major corporations, they have no choice. They have to look at the minorities. They have to see what is best for everybody, because if not, people will stop buying them. People will stop going to them. People will stop paying attention to them. These big corporations, for the sake of their money, they have to change. It is what it is right now. And I feel like that's very powerful. For me, what I see when I retire, I'm definitely trying to be on the ground. I'm trying to, help with policy changes, help with education, instill true African history in schools, because we do not know who we are. We are not taught who we are. We're taught the Europeans are winners, where the Europeans have done everything, and it's not true. So I feel like once I'm retired, it's war for me. I'm trying to do everything I can do to, you know, help promote change for people who are marginalized and people who are forgotten about, for sure.
Well, thank you. And I know we'll kind of engage together, lots of time for discussion and, but just sort of some remarks, to Damion. Yeah.
Sure. I think one of the things we have to remember now, we have a love fest with Muhammad Ali, but it's important to remember that he was in many ways one of the most hated men in America, in white America and Black America at this time. In white America, because he denounced America and was someone who spoke truth to power. In Black America, he was hated because he rejected Christianity and very forcefully. And in Black America in mid-1960s, if you are not Christian, but anti-Christian, that's highly problematic. And also, people thought that he was undermining the progress of the civil rights movement. So Black America and white America is looking at him with a certain level of hostility. And it's important to remember that context. And so for Jim Brown, for Bill Russell and Lou Alcindor, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar to embrace him, I think is a really important moment that begins to kind of shift public opinion about him, particularly in Black America, as he becomes on the forefront of these shifting ideas about the Vietnam War and its consequences. I think that's really important to remember. The other thing I think we have to consider is that when we think about athletes today, is that what athletes are doing in 2021 and 2020 is part of a larger context. And we have to remember that it started with the people in Ferguson, on the streets, with the people in New York, the people in Florida after Trayvon Martin's murder. And athletes found a role to play in this larger movement. And so I think it's important that in some ways we don't think of athletes as starting social revolutions and leading them, but they're playing a part and a role that I think is really important and powerful. I think we got to an interesting moment in the current iteration of Black Lives Matter, because in some ways when Colin Kaepernick took his knee, it was almost as if people kind of paused a bit and what do we do now? What's going on? Okay, the athletes are going to take control, but it's always this synergistic moment where the community and the athletes are sort of feeding off of each other. And what athletes do so effectively is take conversations that people can often marginalize. Oh, it's just those people in Ferguson, or it's just this sort of community of Black people or millennials. And what they do is they nationalize this conversation in such that nobody in America cannot acknowledge this truth or this issue that's being spotlighted. I think thinking about this synergistic kind of relationship, someone said to me recently that they think Colin Kaepernick is the Rosa Parks of this moment. Now, I got some questions about that, but let's just sort of presume that's a fair assessment of him. The only way we'll know is whether this moment continues to be transformative. Or will we just look back and say, wow, that was a really powerful symbol, but things remain the same. And in many ways, it's up to us as concerned people, as citizens, to elevate his sacrifice. And so I think that synergistic relationship is crucial.
Excellent. No, thank you so much for those remarks and helping to contextualize. It's really powerful and important. I'm going to turn it over now for Erin, for your thoughts on where things are and where they're headed in the future.
Absolutely. I don't know how to follow Damien. That was just phenomenal. Let me just add this into the conversation. And in my sincere hope for the future and in future conversations that we really acknowledge and that we see the support that the example of what we find from the Cleveland Summit in the women athlete leaders, particularly the Black women athlete leaders who have been at the center of athletes and social movement now for generations. I think that athletes like Gwen and our athletes in the WNBA and their leadership and in the intersections of racial justice and gender justice and the willingness to connect those conversations and to stand on the front lines and to risk and to be courageous in the same way that we saw with Muhammad. I hope that we are able to see the solidarity, the support, the continued joining of arms the way that we saw represented in the Cleveland Summit for our women leaders who have been on the front lines now for generations, really pushing the needle forward in a way that I don't think gets celebrated, gets acknowledged enough, particularly given, I think, the great risk that our women athletes undergo in taking these courageous stances. So let me just add that into the conversation.
Excellent. I actually just was thinking it would be really wonderful, just we have a few minutes here. We're gonna, we have about 10 more minutes, and seeing that, inviting, of course, questions, comments, but also thought it would be great to hear, how you all think about sharing your wisdom or sharing nuggets of things that you might like to pass along, especially as we're talking about education and to young people in terms of thinking about the legacy of the Cleveland Summit, thinking about athlete activism. Like if you had to share, something that you'd like to speak to young people, something that you would like to pass along to the next generation, like what might you share when it comes to athlete activism and thinking about that? We can start with anyone, but just it occurred to me to ask that question.
I think it's important to remember that athlete activism just doesn't happen at the professional level. It happens with all of us. And one of the great things about sports, one of the things that's unique about the United States is how ingrained sports are in our educational institutions. You travel around the world, it's not like that. And that's because we believe that sports has merit and important value for people who are young and growing and developing. Sports teaches discipline, it teaches teamwork, it teaches fair play, it teaches how to overcome adversity. And I think those are the same kind of tools that you need in order to be someone that makes a change in this world. And so I think it's important to really think about how the lessons that you're learning as being an athlete and how to translate them for social good. And I think Erin really made a great point about how we see that with the women athletes who intricately see their fights to compete as being linked to these fights for gender, racial, and social equality.
Excellent. Who else would like to jump in with the shared wisdom, that, kind of nuggets that you'd like to pass along?
I'll say something really brief. I think for everybody to, I'll say it like this, you're never comfortable when you are creating or promoting or speaking on change, right? No one truly likes change. No one truly likes to transform, because too often enough, we as humans, we get comfortable. So we get set. So once we're comfortable, we feel like we're okay. So I feel like for those who are trying to, speak out or act upon this time right now, this renaissance of social injustice and transformation of this world and people's mentalities, step into that power. It's going to be scary. You may be alone. You will be afraid, But if you step into that power, I guarantee you on the other side, there will be victory. And you will see that people truly support you. You will see that you aren't alone. But you can't get there unless you step into it and be honest with yourself. When I stood on that podium, I was terrified when I got down because I could not believe what I did. And I knew that I was going to be punished. And I knew that I was going to be hated. And I knew that I was going to get death threats. However, once I continued to speak out about it, once I continued to find my confidence and my voice and truly stand in myself and say, I have to fight this fight for the sake of my family, for the sake of my child, for the sake of people who are dying at the hands of this system, I found that on the other side, there are people just like me. There are people who support me, and there are people who say, we believe in what you believe in. Let's fight this good fight together. So stand in your power, whether you are afraid or not.
Thank you. And then yeah, Erin, great. And then we have one question that's come in, but Erin, that'd be great if you can share, and then
I'll be very brief then, Eli, because I know we're running short on time, but I would say, you know, this work is long and it's hard, but it's good work. And, you know, when you are fighting to dismantle systems of power and systems of oppression, those systems will try to fight back the way that they did with Muhammad. They try to fight back violently at times. And it's important to know and to really understand your conviction and who you are and in your authentic space, much like Muhammad did, to stay strong and to stay true to the cause and to stay true to who you are. I would also point out that young people, I think, are at the center of this work, and rightly so, and their experiences and their voices are powerful and they're valid. I would remind everyone that Muhammad was a very young man when he entered into this work, when he stood on the world stage, when he declared who he was going to be and what he believed in. And so, my words to young people would be, keep going. You are correct. Your voice is powerful. Your voice is what we need. I certainly saw in Louisville this summer that our social movements, the movement for Breonna Taylor, for justice, was led by young people. And so, I hesitate to give young people any advice because they're truly leading us forward. They're leading us into the future. They're the ones on the front lines right now. And so I would just say, keep going and look to Muhammad because he, I think, lends a wonderful example of what courageous youth leadership can be and should be, and just keep going. I'll stop there, Eli, for so short on time.
No, thank you all for those. Just thought it'd be great to hear your nuggets to share out, and that was really powerful. And we do have a question. I'll combine it, and we have just a couple more minutes. But there's a question about the integration of athlete activism into society and kind of what are some thoughts on that. And then there's also a question about allyship and kind of how has that been, the experience of allyship? Is it working? Is it not? So you can, for those who would like to chime in, we have a couple minutes before we need to wrap, but perhaps Damion, Gwen, Erin, any remarks to respond to that question?
I want to talk about this issue of allyship, and I want to use someone like Roger Goodell as an example that I think is really important. Roger Goodell, when Colin Kaepernick took the knee, didn't stand up for him. And recently, the beginning of this last season, Roger Goodell said, you know what, I was wrong, we could have done more, and we're on the wrong side of that. And I think it's important for those of us who are engaged in this work to allow people to grow and develop and to change. Those of us who get it immediately, some people take a little bit longer, and it's a different experience, and it's a different lens that leads them to the right side. And you gotta allow people to grow and to join your team, even when they might have been opposed to it.
Oh, great. No, thank you. That's really important comment. So thank you, Damion. Do others want to chime in on these questions? Just to respond, I know Gwen was asked about her experience, and perhaps Erin as well. And then there's been a wonderful conversation. And again, I know this will be a great legacy and thinking about the Cleveland Summit.
In regards to allyship, I feel like it's important for us to be realistic and to know that our allies do not have the same experiences as we do. Our allies are privileged. Our allies are uneducated. Our allies are limited to what they should feel or what they have to feel. They don't have to feel like they have to understand what the marginalized and the Black communities go through because they've never lived their life. So we do have to understand that when it comes to our allies, they are different. However, if our allies choose to stand with us in our fight, they have to know that they have to sacrifice certain things. They have to sacrifice their relationships with their peers or their family members or their associates, because their associates will look at them like they're crazy. And I do feel like our allies also have to self-educate themselves too, because it's not enough to just say, well, I support you. Why do you support me? How do you support me? And then are you willing to sacrifice for the good of me and for those who look like me? So we have to be really realistic about our expectations from our allies, and our allies have to be realistic about what they are getting into and what they're willing to lose and sacrifice when they do support this fight. But I feel like if they are willing to sacrifice and lose, and they are willing to stand on the right side of history, then it'll be better for mankind, honestly.
Thank you, Gwen. Yeah, no, I think allyship and across race, gender, disability, sexual orientation, kind of the ways we are building allyship in so many different ways. I think you really spoke so eloquently about that in terms of sacrifice and learning and growth. And no, that was really, thank you so much. I'm not sure, Erin, do you want to share any remarks, or we can kind of look to wrap it up? Mary, do you want to share maybe a concluding comment, and then we can close?
Yeah, I really, Gwen, I really enjoyed and Damion, your thoughts about allyship, because look at me. I'm like I'll call myself middle-aged. Can I call myself middle-aged? White woman, right? So grew up in a completely different environment. But I know, having also now lived in the able-bodied community and now with an adult onset disability. And I was a longtime ally of the disability community before I had a disability. And so seeing allyship from different sides is very interesting. So I appreciate your comments about allyship and how we need to accept our allies, challenge our allies, and allow them to be, that it's a team. It gets back to these sport analogies about team, doesn't it? It does. And so those comments are greatly appreciated on the importance of allyship. So I would like to say that and thank everybody for the opportunity for all of us to be allies and be working together on events like this, and as we all move forward at this, as I always like to call it, as we move forward at the speed of advocacy. Sometimes isn't very fast, but it's forward. It's forward. So I will say that, and then Eli, I'll swing it back over to you.
Sure. No, I just want to again just thank you all. This opportunity to include this conversation as part of the Cleveland Power of Sport Summit, and to really make sure that this history was there and present, and that we could have these conversations, that we could learn from each other. And again, kind of we framed it as past, present, future, and to think about how we are moving forward, and to understand the context and also the role of Muhammad Ali. And so I think this is really amazing, wonderful, and hopefully this can even become history. So even this conversation can be used just as a starting point. But I think, we're going to go ahead and close out. I'll turn it back to our FQ. But part of this whole conversation is to really anchor it. But we're going to go ahead and thank our panelists, thank our host, the Cleveland Sports Commission, the FQ folks. And just again, to echo our panelists about just recognizing that the power that we have and the role that we have in our society, and to really share that in the way that Gwen has, and the way that others are really recognizing their voice, and to realize that, this is important, that athletes in sport have such a pivotal role in our society, and to join forces, to be vocal, to engage, and really excited about where the future holds. So again, thank you all so much, and we're going to turn it over to the organizer.
And one reminder, remember the Ali Summit this summer.
And we're going to go ahead and continue these conversations
Yeah.
in an ongoing many different ways. But we do have upcoming toward the end of June, we're going to have a forum which is going to really build on this conversation today. So
yeah.
We welcome everyone for that, of course.
Yes.
Good. Well, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Gwen,
Thank
Erin.
you.
Yeah. Take care.